All right, the time has finally come. I've made it around to playing the Shadow Bloodwave or Shadow Surfer build this season in season 4. And the thing is like just an inexorable force. It is truly the question of what happens when an unstoppable force meets the pit. And the answer is you kind of just Shadow Bloodwave everything until it dies while laughing, because it's like the second most Honey Badger build that I've played this season, only second to Blight. This thing is just very good. I would argue that the gear I'm about to show you is like fairly mid for what we're going to go for. It does have some specific tempers, but outside of that, you just kind of like walk up and smash stuff. Now you got to learn how to play the build. It's a very interesting play style that isn't quite like anything else that the Necromancer does, but I find it to be incredibly engaging, very tactile, as well as tactical. So both you feel like you're actively doing something, and you also have to be making good decisions to get the most out of the build, because where I'm currently sacrificing a ton of my mobility for survivability and damage, you don't necessarily have to do that for places like speed farming in the open world, etc. But I basically just took some of the Blight gear that I had, some pretty okay gear I had in the rest of my stash, got the tempers that I needed, masterworked them a little bit, and that was a fairly easy tier 100 that you're seeing me clear right here. Now, is this thing as flashy or as fast as some of the other things that you're going to see? No, but I think that the ability to just say, hey, I will kill you given enough time and I will get my rewards for running this tier 100 pit is more than good enough to make you ask the question, should I try out the Shadow Surfer? Now, taking a bunch of feedback from previous videos that I did, basically they're all too long. People want more tips and tricks and gameplay. People want more understanding of how this stuff works. And for me to kind of break it all down a little bit simpler so you can kind of walk away feeling good about it, I'm going to try to do my best to accomplish that right here, right now. Use the timestamps down to anything that you have particular questions on. I will also have an updated D4 planner. So this is pretty distinctly different than what my Theorycraft was at the beginning of the season. And now that I've actually played it, I do think that it warrants having a build guide on max roll. So look forward to that in the upcoming week or two. I just have a lot on my plate right now. I have 2 build guides I need to update, and I need to write an entirely new one. So for right now, use the build planner. All right, let's go ahead and drop into it. Not using a generator skill, just putting 1 point into Blight to be able to get the 20% damage multiplier here. On top of that, Blight has a pretty decent lucky hit chance, so we're able to use that to proc various things across the rest of our skill tree, proc a bunch of CC effects, and then on top of that, proc Decrepify for a little bit of extra cooldown reduction. Although if you have good enough stats and some greater affix stats, you basically don't need that at all. You're going to cast Bloodwave, and by the time it's done, you can cast another Bloodwave or even sooner. You'd Flesh just be able to help generate some corpses here and there. This helps to be able to proactively cast Corpse Tendrils in some fights, and also just give you a bunch of fodder so you can cast Corpse Explosion for Blighted uptime, which the build does suffer from a little bit. Basically, your first Blood Wave will get your Shadow Blight almost fully procced, and then the next one will enjoy the benefits of it. So that's why we basically need to help that out as often as we can, so both Blight and Corpse Explosion are going to do that for you. I'm putting the rest of my dump points into Blood Mist to have as low of a cooldown on this as possible, and obviously Corpse Generation as well, so that we can proactively Blood Mist through monsters, and then basically use Explosive Mist for generating more Corpse Explosion procs, and then on top of that, reduce cooldown even further. So do not sleep on Corpse Production, and also putting dump stats into Blood Mist, because it will help out a ton. Just 1 point into Corpse Explosion, and then Blighted Corpse Explosion. We don't care about this damage at all. No, it doesn't help. If you haven't seen my most recent video, where I basically explained that Corpse Explosion does no damage at all, I recommend going and checking that out. Obviously, Fueled by Death for the Corpse Explosion multiplier whenever we consume a corpse. Just 1 point into Decrepify with Abhorrent Decrepify. Yes, you could put in more points over here, and I don't think that that would be terribly bad. It would help with managing monster aggro a little bit better, but I didn't even really feel that in danger at tier 100. And again, my gear is not that great. Obviously, 3 points into Amplify Damage as well as Death's Embrace. You'll notice that I have 3 ranks to Death's Embrace because my amulet doesn't even have Gloom ranks on it. All I have is Death's Embrace. And I gotta say, I'm feeling pretty good about Death's Embrace on the amulet. If I could get that as well as the major passive for my skill every single time, I think it would feel really good. That is a metric ton of damage reduction. That's 24% damage reduction just from this one passive. Just 1 point into Corpse Tendrils, and then Plagued Corpse Tendrils. You might notice we're not even using Blighted Corpse Tendrils. On lower gear with less cooldown reduction, might you use this for Blood Orb generation? Sure. You just don't need it though. Once you hit a certain amount of cooldown reduction, a single cast of Blood Wave will reset itself, and you can enjoy the increased uptime on vulnerability here. We are putting the 3 points into Gruesome Mending because I'm currently using Temerity to generate Barrier. I think in the endgame, you really don't need that. You would basically just manage your survivability through Blood Mist uptime, and then you could regain these points. And on top of that, you could put on Stronger Pants with more intelligence, or even use something like Tybalt's Will for another damage multiplier. We are putting the 3 points into Necrotic Carapace. We do need to stack on as much survivability as possible, and we generate a decent amount of corpses. On top of that, we're going to be putting just the 1 point into Reaper's Pursuit, and then maxing out everything else in the Shadow Tree. Obviously, Blood Wave, it's the name of the game, and then we're going all the way to Supreme here to generate the Blood Orbs. Then we're picking up Standalone, Memento Mori, and then Shadow Blight. For the gear, you're going to notice that I'm using a Shako. Do you need a Shako? You absolutely do not need a Shako. You could definitely be using a helmet that has greater affix on intelligence, maximum life, and then here's where I would actually need cooldown reduction. It's the only reason why I'm not currently using it. It's because I couldn't roll cooldown reduction, and I didn't have a helmet that had these stats. But Shako is not the best helmet. Something like this absolutely would. You get another lucky hit chance to be able to apply a freeze effect. This would also allow you to move Explosive Mist up here, and you could either throw on something like Void to pull things in with Blight for even more CC, or actually put Slaughter onto your boots so you're not walking around at grandpa speed like you saw me doing. I am currently using Shako though because it has the cooldown reduction stat that I need to be able to hit that cooldown just off of a single cast of Blood Wave. Then we're going to go with armor that has intelligence, maximum life, and then you have to manage your armor here if you're using Temerity. If not, you could have your armor kind of wherever you want. More lucky hit chance to be able to apply even more crowd control effects. Then we're using Hardened Bones. For the gloves, these gloves are kind of trash. I do like the fact that it has lucky hit chance to be able to apply vulnerable just because we don't have great uptime on vulnerable and we would like more if possible. So I would like for these to say intelligence and then maybe attack speed and vulnerable, or even just more damage over time to be able to scale that even further. We do want to be tempering on Desecrated Ground since it's a niche stat. It's going to outperform the vast majority of other additive damage sources that you can add onto this, even outperforming base damage, so like generic damage, even though that will go on to double dip on damage over time. I do think that if you do the math, the min roll on Desecrated ends up outperforming that, so I'd rather have the worst case scenario be stronger than the other one, but you will get a little bit more additive if you go with the damage route on any of these gear pieces that you see. On top of that, just more lucky hit to be able to apply crowd control, and then this is where we're putting Title. The reason why we're putting Title is mostly to add on 2 more knockback effects, slightly increase the amount of time that Desecrated Ground is on the field, as well as generate more blood orbs. Title does not increase your damage. In fact, you can't multiply Desecrated Ground's damage by overlapping them in any meaningful way. That's just not how it applies to targets. I think this is a bug. I've reported it to the developers a bunch of times, but go ahead and cast 1 blood wave and then cast 3 blood waves and see the fact that your damage doesn't change at all. It's pretty wild. Like I said, we are using Temerity since we're picking up blood orbs all of the time. It just naturally synergizes with the ability to generate barrier. So that's how you'll notice we will blood wave through, blood mist through, and then walk out with tens of thousands of additional barrier before we re-engage. This is definitely the safety net version. You would either be using Tybalt's for more damage, or you would be going with more intelligence on pants, because intelligence is definitely our most important stat to be able to stack the Wither legendary node as far as possible. But for right now, if you want the easy way out, throw on Temerity, you'll feel like a tank, you'll feel unkillable. For the boots, intelligence, movement speed, and then essence per second helps with casting Blight without needing to generate essence at any point. Then we go with temper movement speed and then temper more lucky hit to apply CC. This is where I'm currently running Explosive Mist. The reason why Explosive Mist is so important here is it's going to help with that Shadow Blight uptime and get a few more effects onto the field for being able to trigger Lucky Hit, since Blood Wave has a really low percentage chance of triggering it. We don't get a ton of mileage out of Decrepify, but Explosive Mist will help a little bit with that. And then also just make Blood Mist available more often, so you feel like you have your oh no button up when you need it. And this definitely helps in the boss of the pit to feel just more secure and being able to move around the battlefield without dying. For the amulet, you do want an intelligence roll. You would also want a cooldown reduction roll, and then Gloom. You can go with Death's Embrace for that damage reduction. I do really like it. Gloom or Terror, you much prefer Gloom here, but definitely go for the intelligence roll. Definitely get a cooldown reduction. Here we're going to temper on ultimate cooldown and then Desecrated Ground damage as well. And this is where we're putting Blighted. Again, Blighted is not going to have great uptime, but you should basically have it every 1 to 1.5 blood waves. Basically, you want to capitalize when the monsters are stunned or when you have the boss staggered to make sure that you have this procced before you throw out blood wave so you can get the maximum benefit out of it. For the rings, more intelligence, damage over time. You can go with attack speed here just to be able to make all of your animations that much faster. I went with maximum life because that's what I had on it. Then more ultimate cooldown reduction, then more desecrated ground. This is where we're putting damned for a big damage multiplier whenever we cast Decrepify. And then lastly, on your last ring, you basically want to follow the exact same schema. This is where you're going to put fast blood. Fast blood on the amulet, if you have worse gear, is a great way to be able to basically cheat out faster blood waves. Once you have as much cooldown reduction as me, so once you're sitting around like the 28, 27 second range on the tooltip, you can immediately recast this just by going through your blood wave and picking up all of the orbs. So don't worry about that. But on earlier gear or on worse gear, you can absolutely get away with putting this onto your amulet and then moving Blighted down onto your ring. The damage will be less, but you'll feel like you're able to pilot the build that much easier. Book of the Dead, we're going to be sacrificing Reapers for the shadow damage, Cold Mages for the vulnerable damage, and then I went with Blood Golem for more maximum life. I'm sitting on a cute 38,000 maximum life with a maximum life elixir on, and it feels really nice to get 80% of that as barrier. I feel like an absolute tank. If you were going for more aggressive playstyle, obviously you can go with the attack speed. That would drop you down to about 34,000 life if you follow along with what I currently have here. For the Paragon, again, I'm going to have a planner down below, but basically we're looking to maximize damage. We're looking to maximize maximum life as well, and as many multipliers as we can get. We're going to put Amplify into our first board. We're going to pass through Wither twice. On Wither, we're going to put Abyssal here. Building over into Flesh Eater, we're going to use Sacrificial. Remember, until they fix it, you can't use your pet and benefit from Sacrificial. Luckily in the pit, you don't have to pick up any loot, so the pet doesn't really do anything for you other than be an emotional support pet, which is definitely valuable. I'm not going to knock the pet lovers out there. Building up into Bone Graft, do make sure to actually hit the willpower for tenacity for that huge amount of maximum life. And then this is where we're going to be putting Exploit. This is why we care about having vulnerable uptime as high as possible, because we want to be able to benefit from this additional 1.1 multi here. Building over into Cult Leader, this is where we're going to put Scourge for a little bit more damage over time, and then another multi for targets who are affected by shadow damage over time. Back through Wither, do not sleep on picking up all of the damage reduction nodes here. Super valuable. We're also going to pick up more maximum life, and then obviously the Wither node itself. You want to max out your intelligence. Why? Because Wither says I have nearly a 50% chance of tripling the amount of damage I do per tick. Intelligence, maxing out Wither, that's the most powerful addition to this build. Building over into Sent to Death, obviously we want to pick up Shadow Resilience for maximum life, the legendary node, and then this is where we're going to be putting in Desecration. You might ask the question, why are we not maxing this out? Why don't you want all of that additive damage? The additive damage that we would gain here would be a drop in the bucket. We have thousands and thousands of additive damage. I do put my leftover points into this area right here, just to be able to pick up a little bit more damage because there's nowhere else to put them, but do not worry about maxing this out in its entirety. We want more glyphs, and on this 7 board setup, where building into hulking is where we'll drop control as our last multiplier. You really don't have enough points to be able to max out this boy right here. Don't worry about doing that. Now let's talk about tips and tricks. First off, what does the build do? Well, the build casts Blood Wave, and then Blood Wave will cast 3 times, and it will generate a total of 9 blood orbs. Picking up these blood orbs will reduce the cooldown of Blood Wave as long as you're using fast blood. And as you saw, by the time I went and picked up all my blood orbs that were generated here, I was able to recast Blood Wave again. Your mileage is going to vary wildly based off of how much cooldown reduction you have, so pay attention to what I said in the gear section, unless you just skipped that. But let's get back into gameplay and let's just talk about what we're trying to do. Here, since the ability to output damage is tied to such a long cooldown, we want to be applying Blood Wave to as many monsters as possible. The funny part here being that the monsters don't have to get hit by the wave, they just have to walk on top of the desecrated ground. Because of that, being able to push very far into monster packs with Blood Mist, turn around, cast Blood Wave, and then run back through it, will not only allow you to pick up your blood orbs to reduce its cooldown, but on top of that, will make it so that the monsters that you just aggroed from off screen will come running onto your Blood Wave. Because of this, you can really output a ton of additional efficiency by just making sure that you are pulling monsters as aggressively as possible. Not only that, blood waving through a pack of monsters will typically leave behind a couple corpses, so the ones that just engaged on you with all their elite affixes or their damage reduction are going to be right next to something that you can target with corpse tendrils to get everybody nice and bunched up. Why? You just picked up all of your blood orbs and you're going to cast Blood Wave again. You should expect to cast Blood Wave 1 to 2 times per combat, depending on how tanky the monsters are or how high into the pit that you're currently pushing. But on top of that, you need to be able to output that type of uptime on this skill to get the maximum benefit out of it. On top of this, once you have everything buffed up or just to be able to engage more safely, make sure to cast Decrepify, slow him down, get that additional damage reduction on top of those targets. And on top of that, it's going to mean that you're going to be able to proc Decrepify as often as possible to make it so that if you happen to accidentally Blood Wave into a corner or just in the wrong direction because you're playing on controller like me, often your blood orbs will not generate because they actually generate along the path of Blood Wave and it gets interrupted. You don't want to get screwed, messed up, and be caught out without a cooldown on hand. So Decrepify will help out a ton like that. Blight is really just to be able to pass on to tankier targets or bosses to make sure that you have as many damage multipliers and sources of overlapping damage over time as possible to maintain a maximum uptime on Shadow Blight and the blighted aspect. But on top of that, it will help with Lucky Hit cooldown just a little bit. It'll also apply Crippling Darkness for some more stuns. But it's a very simple game plan. Run through monsters or Blood Mist through monsters, Blood Wave back behind you, pull monsters in front of you on top of your Blood Wave, make sure to cast Corp Tendrils and Decrepify, toss out a Blight onto any tanky monsters, pick up your orbs, and then move on. Also keep in mind that you can kind of just leave monsters dying behind in your Blood Wave, especially in the pit where you don't have to pick up gear. Use that opportunity. Make up the efficiency of not necessarily being able to use a movement speed aspect on your boots if you are using a Shaco, or just trying to output more damage and more survivability, and leave stuff to die. If it doesn't die, it'll come find you, and you'll probably have already cast Blood Wave in front of you again, and they'll just run through that and then get stuck in the exact same predicament they found themselves before. So, Blood Wave, crowd control, Blood Wave again, pick up your orbs, crowd control, Blood Wave, etc., etc. On the boss itself, you do have to play a little bit differently, and that's only because you need to make sure that you're blood waving, again, not directly into walls, but keeping the monster itself on top of your blood wave. Because of this, people like the Bloodlord are just like auto resets as far as I'm concerned. If you have good enough gear and good enough cooldown reduction, you can basically Blood Mist through whenever his orbs would pop, or manage to stagger him in time. But the majority of bosses here, whether they're mobile or not, are going to give you windows to be able to cast Blood Wave on top of. So don't feel like you have to spam it every single time that it's up. Make sure they're going to get hit by it. Make sure that you're benefiting from the blighted aspect before you cast it. And also try to eat up some corpses to proc your Flesh Eater, as well as your Fueled by Death, so that you're outputting as much damage as possible every single time that you do cast it. This is definitely a game of quality over quantity, as opposed to basically every other Necro build which just says, if it's off cooldown, click it. But there we go. That's the Shadow Surfer, that Shadow Blood Wave. It did really, really good. It's doing significantly better than other core skills other than Blight with Ebon Piercer. And you'll actually even see Shadow Blood Wave like pretty decently high up on the ladder pit push that we have on max roll. The build's solid. It's surprisingly tanky. It has a lot of cool tools that you can use, and also has a lot of places where you can just add on more damage as long as you're willing to play harder. I do think that like the gear can be a little bit restrictive. You're definitely making a Shadow Wave build. This gear won't really work for other builds. It'll do okay on Blight, but the temper for Desecrated Ground can be a no-go for some people, but I think it's worth it. This thing is definitely doing better than Sever. I'm having just as much fun as I was on Blight. I even feel, I'll be honest with you, like a little bit tankier than Blight, just because you are generating barrier at such high rates. You can proactively consume your potions to generate barrier as well, so when you come out at Blood Mist, you're already max on barrier. The build feels really great. But let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Are you enjoying it? Remember to use the build planner that I have. Yes, there will be a build guide. Yes, I'm working on it. Yes, I'm sorry. It turns out I have a lot of jobs, and I've already given up as much sleep as I possibly can, but I promise you it is coming. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. If you wouldn't mind subscribing and throwing a like on it if you haven't already, I would deeply appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.